Guys, there's someone on my tail!
Why, hello there, Red Leader here, or a very sweaty Canadian computer collector, and we're back with another recap of some of the more interesting retro tech auctions that have occurred over the last 30 days. We got some really cool stuff to get through, but before we do not forget to like, subscribe, and to tell a friend, because your word of mouth means more than anything that YouTube could possibly throw at us at this point in our careers. So spread it on, and make sure you stick around to the end, because we've got some unobtainium for you. That'll be a high-ticket item thing. Spread it on! Up first, we're looking at a couple of clamshell iBooks. This first one, complete with box, a base station in the box, and an airport in the box. It actually sold for a total of $579 US and almost $100 US in shipping. That's like basically $700.
You know clams are an aphrodisiac.
Up next is a tangerine clamshell without the box, but it does come with OS 9 and, dare I say, OS 10? Comes with OS 9 and OS X installed. This one pulled $250 US. And here's another one, similar, that brought in $283 US. And while we're keeping the tangerine train rolling, here we have a boxed example, the big brother of the formers that we just looked at. This, the latter, sold for $599 US. And rounding out the G3 section, we have this lovely little regular person iBook that brought a meager $56 US. Imagine not buying the bright colored laptop back in the day because you think you're cool. Never mind. And while we're looking at regular person iBooks, here's a 12-inch G4 that sold for $210, and here's another that brought $110 US. All right, moving along, we have a famously untested G4 Cube, and in many cases, you could argue that a lot of people say things are untested because they probably know they don't work, and this is just an easy out. Sometimes, though, if they're also listed, as this one is, as is for parts, it can be a seller just trying to cover their bases. It might be a working machine, but by the time it arrives, it might not turn on anymore. This is just how classic computers work sometimes. They're fussy, and it could just be a seller covering their bases. So who knows what's going on here? This one sold for $275 US. Well, if we actually look at one that is tested and confirmed to work, it brought in an additional 110 at $385 US. So you take a bit of a risk in posting it as a working machine, but you can get a little more money that way. Onto this Powermac G4 MDD tower. This one sold for $40 US, which is a bit surprising to me, considering MDDs are pretty fancy machines. Here we have a G4 Mac Mini, which we looked at a little bit last time. This one brought $120 US, but it's a little bit loose. There's less on the bone here. But right behind it, we have something that's got a little more meat on the carriage. We've got a very complete example, and this one sold for a breathtaking $390 US. So we've looked at some cool Macs. I think Stack might argue he's a cool Mac.
You know.
Rhymes with Stack, here comes the Mac attack. So let's look at some cool, cold PCs now. First up, we have a Silicon Graphics Octane workstation. This beefy boyo brought $449 US.
I want one so bad.
I think these are the coolest things ever. These are the machines that I think, if I remember correctly, what Donkey Kong Country was built on.
And Toy Story?
Possibly. Its luxurious friend, the SGI O2, another beefy boyo from the SGI stable. This one brought $1,140 US, which seems like a lot, even with its $115 worth of shipping. We're at like, $1,250 basically. All right, and if you thought that O2 was impressive, you're gonna love this. This is the SGI Fuel. This tiny red hot machine. Yeah.
Because I have nothing spotted in the shoes.
Oh yeah, no problem.
I want to move, but I have lost it. I said,
Oh yeah, no problem. This is the SGI Fuel. Now, this wicked little red compact machine, much like a suave Italian sports car that I won't name,
Ferrari.
this thing is also super expensive and sold for $2,999. And I gotta be honest, I haven't seen one of these before. It might just be because I haven't done a deep enough dive on SGI machines. I thought I had, but maybe I'm an idiot. On the heels of this very cool SGI stuff, we have something that's similarly cool, but maybe a little bit cheaper. We're going to do a bit of a dive into the Pentium 2 era, but first of all, we're going to start it off with this. This is an Intergraph TDZ 2000 GL2. This mouthful of purple and wine-colored plastic looks pretty darn cool to me. I imagine it's probably just as slow as any Pentium 2 is. However, it's definitely a sign of the era. This one sold for $224.50, and I gotta say, I think it's pretty cool. I wouldn't mind sprucing that thing up and putting it on a shelf. It's got a hard 90s vibe.
Now, this being the 90s, you can't just walk up to a guy and smack him in the face. You gotta say something cool first, you know what I mean?
So we're talking Pentium 2s, we're talking purple. Let's go straight into this Sony Vaio 366 megahertz laptop. I'm gonna call this the Purple People Pleaser because someone nabbed it for $250 US, and I think that's a spanking deal. For a 90s laptop that is only 366 megahertz, that's this purple. This one's less pleasing, one might say, but if you love Dell, then you're probably gonna like this one. It's the Dell Inspiron Pentium 2. This one sold for only $160 US, and I can only theorize that's because it's not purple.
I thought it was pronounced Inspiron.
Moving along with the Dells, we've got the Dimension XPS R450 desktop. This sweet little beige tower sold for $200 US. And to finish off our Pentium 2 stuff, we've got these really cool 8-inch Intel Spaceman Pentium beanies. This green guy sold for $9.30 US, while a pair of them, a yellow and a pink Beanie Man, sold for $12.29. And I might argue, I find these Beanie Men a lot cooler than the Beanie Man. Alright, let's go back a bit further in time. We're going to hit up the 386s. Here's a big old beige boy that I found. This thing's a little bit dirty around the edges, but he sold for $200 US, which seems like a fair trade. But it also was about half of that in shipping. So you're looking at about $300 US to bring that guy home. Here's a Tandy 2500 386. This sold for $280 US. I like this because I have an original one in the box. Ladies,
I think there's like a Beanie Babies YouTube community. I'm sure there is.
it's worth investigating. We could even do a canyon run on them.
Guys, it's someone on my tail!
That's the explosion. Moving along, we got a Laser 386 SX. This handsome looking machine sold for a whopping $155 US. Time for an old Gateway machine, and this one predates the Holstein cow patterns. This is a Gateway 2000, a 386. This one sold for $300 US. And if staying at home to compute is not for you, we've got a compact portable 3. Now this 386, we looked at one last time. This one actually sold this time around for $349.95. And if I remember correctly, it was a lot cheaper when we looked at it last month. That seems like a lot of money compared to last month. But if you compare it to another portable, one of a little more historical significance, we have an IBM 5155. Now, this thing brought in $800 US and another $122 in shipping. So we're almost basically at $1,000 with taxes and duty, you know, if I'm ordering this thing over the border, or under $1,000 if it's staying in good old America.
I want it because of Steins Gate.
Is that one of the Steins Gate ones?
Well, it was the IBN 5100, not the 51 whatever.
We got IBM on the brain, so we're going to move right into the next one. Now, this 433DX, this chunk had the nerve to sell for $270 US. While its much slimmer, arguably starving counterpart, the PS2 Model 30, sold for just $100 US. And I would like to say, this is an excellent time to buy these. These things, PS2s, were getting pretty popular during the pandemic. I'm going to say I am bullish on the PS2 right now. $100 Model 30, pizza box form factor, you could stack them up to the ceiling, probably 100 high before they start falling on your family members. I think it's a great investment at this time.
Is that financial advice?
This is not financial advice.
You have finance, bro? We gonna go do push-ups? Just gotta do push-ups every hour?
Got this amazing, complete can get, without a box, PS2 L40 SX laptop. Let's just take a moment to drink this thing in. This is gorgeous. Don't even get me started. Don't even get me started. I've not seen a classic laptop this cool ever. You know, I think I'm gonna have to praise the ground it walks on. This thing sold for $470 US, but it stole my heart. Okay, I want to hop into a Commodore 64 or two. This one sold for $219 US, but it's been completely cleaned, recapped, and tested. This is as clean gets, and is basically what DK Oldies should be doing. This next 64 sold for $279 US, and it's also been fully restored and recapped. And this is probably the best way to get into a retro machine that is going to last for a while. One that you can run for more than half an hour without freaking out. The VIC-20, unlike the 64, seems to be less popular, bringing smaller numbers. This example, with a box, sold for only $50 and almost as much in shipping. Here's another VIC-20 that sold for $200 this time with the box. But here's another one that sold for $80. So it really kind of shows that there's a bit of a range on these machines. Here's a really cool commenter. This is a 128, something you don't see very often, something I haven't seen locally. This one brought $180 and is tested and confirmed to boot to a blank screen. Here's a weird little Amiga 1000 keyboard. This thing is...
Wait. Boot to a blank screen. That's not booting.
That's a sign of life, is what that is. Coming up next, we have a weird little Amiga 1000 keyboard. This thing's working as well, and doesn't boot to anything because it's a keyboard. However, this brought a staggering $252. Just the keyboard alone. Let's have a look at some Ataris. This is an 800 XL, complete with box and games. Apparently it's missing some cords, but it sold for $132.50. That seems pretty reasonable, frankly, for a box machine. Not hard to find replacement cables, let's be honest. Next up, this Atari 800 came with all the cords this time, as well as some games, and netted a total of $500. Next up, we got an Atari 400, so I'm guessing it's half of an 800?
No. Give him the whole computer. I would rather see it whole than to be cut down to a 400.
So this Atari 400 apparently is untested, as they said, but it comes with a fairly rough box. This thing brought in $85, which is a shame because I love its strange form factor. And while it doesn't look like it was cut in half, it definitely looks too weird to be a normal computer. All right, so let's switch some gears and head back to L'Appel. But let's get a little bit newer with it. So first off, I want to look at the 15-inch 2015 MacBook Pro Retina. This used to be the go-to laptop for a lot of people, and they're starting to become very affordable. This dual graphics model right here sold for just $299, while this next one brought $192, which is surprising me. I mean, I had a dual graphics MacBook Pro Retina that I paid about $700 for. Ended up selling it for about $700, so I probably got out at the right time. But you know,
don't they just overheat?
They throttle pretty badly. Here's another one that brought $320, which goes to kind of show that there's a bit of a range to the price of these things. I would say though, safely between $200 and $300, you could get yourself a really nice dual graphics 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro. So think about it. Up next, we got the Trash Can Mac Pro. These are also starting to come down a bit. They're not all the way there yet. I'm not ready to purchase one yet because it's going to be a low-end computer for me that I'm probably not going to use anyway. But I love the form factor and they're very cool. So let's start out with a 12-core model. This one sold for $440, which I think is maybe a little bit high. These also had thermal problems from what I've heard, just because of that cylindrical design where you are relying on the heat to come out the top. Here's another model. This is a 6-core Mac Pro. This one sold for $275, which is getting closer to what I'd be willing to part with. And then finally, we have a quad-core model that sold for just $225. So there really is something to the phrase, more cores for more precious ores. This month I also grabbed some Newton products to show you folks. Here we have a MessagePad 130 that sold for $60, and here's a 120 that sold for $80. But this one had a few more accessories. Also, if you want to talk accessories, you got to check out this Mega Lot. This one came with 2 Newton 130s, original boxes, software, manuals, cables, all that stuff, and it brought $400, which seems like a lot, but if you love the Newton, you'll make it happen. Yeah, am I right?
Take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin.
Here's another cool one. This is the eMate 300. Still a little handheld Apple device. This one sold for $150 with a power cable. I saw one of those for sale recently, and unfortunately I just wasn't quick enough. It's like Jeopardy around here with the classic retro tech collectors. You know, an ad comes for sale, and they're like, Alex Trebek is like, oh, Dan, I heard you're from Canada. I am too. Next up, we have Next. And this Next Cube is something I've wanted for a very long time, but it is seemingly quite rare where I live. It seems a lot of them didn't make it up this far north, perhaps. And here's one that sold for just under $600, which is starting to trend downward, if you ask me. I remember during the pandemic, these were like north of 1,000 all day long. Here's another one that sold for $710. Now these are both apparently from estate sales, which leads me to believe that either there was a collector out there who died, or someone is killing Next owners. On the heels of the Next Cube, we have another weird machine, one that I also long for deep into the night. It is the 20th anniversary Mac, also known as the TAM. Now, these are rare and weird and appear on a handful of Seinfeld episodes, and this particular one sold for $1,426.50 United States dollars. Now here's something that caught me by surprise. We've got a PowerBook 550 color, and this one sold for $880 US. Mind you, it did come with the original box and accessories. Seems like a lot. Now, speaking of expensive laptops, we got the Mac Portable, and these things are always popular, and they seem to still be doing well as far as value goes. This gorgeous beast sold for $402 US. Speaking of old Apple stuff, we got the 2GS WAS. We got one here that sold for just $100 US. And now I thought this was really interesting because you can find the keyboards for these things selling for more than that, and this one came with a keyboard. So explain that to me. Here's one that's kind of cool. This is a System Saver cooling fan attachment for the Apple II. This thing apparently has been tested and works, and it's sold for $26 US, which seems quite reasonable. Here's a 20SC external drive. This one sold for $200 US, which is fantastic because I have 3. On a more serious note though, this one is tested and working, which to me is shocking because the spinning rust in that thing must be doing a good job of keeping things clean. This is a very old portable drive, so it must be sold by a wizard. So not often the subject of discussion, we have a mega boring Macintosh 2 SI. This one's been recapped and cleaned and brought only $129 US. Frankly, this is a great restored machine at a reasonable price. If you're looking to get into a classic, this is another one, like we said of those Commodores, that you can run for more than 30 minutes without crapping yourself. Anyway, it's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. It is time for the
friggin' unobtainium.
We got a banger for you this week, folks. But before we get into that, we have a runner-up. So this thing is pretty cool. This is a Macintosh Color Classic 2.
So this is obtainium?
This is medium-tanium. So this is a Macintosh Color Classic 2 without a box, but it includes a mouse and keyboard. Super rare machine, but they did make a number of these. This one sold for $1,267 US total. Here it is. This is the unobtainium, folks. Can we get a drum roll?
It's gonna be really bad on the phone.
Oh yeah. All right, here we go. This is a very cool computer. We have a Powermac 9700 Power Express prototype. This is a working piece of Apple history, tested, it actually functions, and it's sold for $2,800 US with 8 bidders. That means that this thing had some serious action, and this is not someone trying to pump up the market. This is a one-of-a-kind prototype, legit, like I said, piece of Apple history that sold for $2,800. I think that is awesome. I mean, it's pretty good for the seller, though they may have made more 3 years ago if they had thrown that thing on eBay. Not trying to throw some shade, but you know what? That's it for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this with your friends. I'm the Canadian Computer Collector. Goodbye.